hello and welcome back to Aetheral Space 9.7. Time was merciless. We are back. Hello, Darnell. My friend.
Hello. I'm curious. I see there's a date here, ATR. What's the current date, ATR?
It's, I think it's around 120 or so.
Wait, what?
120? 1120 ATR, sorry. 1,000.
1120.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not exactly, but approximately.
So that's from about 160 years ago.
No, sorry. 1020. So it's around 60 years.
Okay. So this guy is a professional, okay? He's got his setting all written out. No, I'm kidding. 1020, okay. So does that imply there was a 60-year time skip with skippers being frozen or what have you?
Well, I don't know what implies that. Oh, you tell me, smile.
Oh joy, a new star rises in the sky. Oh honor, a new contender makes his claim. Oh truth, a new supreme takes the throne. I don't know why I'm reading it like slam poetry. On this day, he is the one who has achieved this pinnacle. He succeeds the false supreme, named Henry Del Mucranay. He achieves the apex via merit of the Dawn contest. He has defeated the vile abyssal heir to stake his claim. Let his old name be washed from the world. Now he is supreme, and only supreme. Oh joy, a new star rises in the sky, and shines brighter than any other. Oh honor, a new contender makes his claim, the first true might since records began. Oh truth, a new supreme takes the throne, and shall reign for all of time. Supreme Guard, attend! Coronation of the Supreme, April 22nd, 960 ATR. This kind of answers another question people had, which does Aetheral Space still use the 12-month system that we know?
Well, you know now there is at least 4 months in a year.
Yeah, well, we know. Yeah. Unless this was in European time and there's 22 months and that was the 4th day.
Beautiful galaxy, Europe.
Yeah, people were curious about that. So what I'm understanding is once you become the Supreme, your name is basically Supreme. And once you're no longer Supreme, you get your old shitty
like,
name
wow,
back.
that guy got beat. He must have been a fake-ass Supreme. Now
So
we've
I have
got
a
the
question.
real Supreme. This guy is super strong.
Have there been any Supremes who just ruled until they died of old age? And if so, what do they say about that? Like, do they still call them
that's sort of
Supremes?
what's happened in this case. If you have a look through it, so it never says that he sort of beat the old one here.
No, I know, but I'm saying, like, let's say a Supreme dies of old age. How do they write that? Like, oh, he was... Do they still call it a false, or are they just like, oh, he died?
Oh, false
sad.
Supreme.
Anyway.
If he was the real Supreme, he wouldn't have died.
Of old age?
He would have beat it.
He would have immortality. So the only true Supreme can ever be, like, a fucking gene tyrant.
The true Supreme is whoever is the current Supreme.
That's so funny. The world reconstructed itself around Dragon. Blades of glass.
Oh, grass, sorry.
Is it supposed to be glass?
You found it.
Sorry, blades of grass painted into
You found one of my
existence by
5
invisible
little tiny
hands.
Easter eggs.
If you collect them all, you get a free snow
You
cone.
can unlock a new costume for Dragon.
Beach Dragon.
Well, I never mentioned the beach. You thought of some of Dragon all by yourself, so I don't know what you're thinking about.
That's because anytime there's an extra costume, it's always like a beach costume. It only took a second for a blue sky and a pale green sun to make their appearances as well. This was a planet of hills and fields, tiny mobile villages dotting the landscape. Mobile village? Where was this? Dragon went to look around, only to jump as someone stepped in next to him. It was Skipper, without a doubt, now maybe 16 or so, wearing a strange uniform. How old had he been before in kid form?
Like 10 or 11.
Gotcha. A buttoned-up blue coat with a tall cylindrical hat and a long plasma musket held up towards the sky. To put it bluntly, he looked like he was a part of a marching band. The uniform of the Supreme Guard, Hamashtiel mused from the ground, where he'd taken on a tiny, feline form. I take it you were accepted into their ranks, then?
Yeah.
The true Skipper, hands plunged into his pockets, shrugged. What you see is what you get, he said. Nice uniform, Dragon commented. Hey, it was a different time, Skipper shot back, a wry smirk on his face. It didn't quite reach his eyes. More and more figures began to flicker into existence around their group, more members of the Supreme Guard, all clad in the same uniforms as the young skipper. Dragon stumbled backwards, facing straight through the guardsman closest, a young pugnacious man with curly red hair and golden eyes. The 100 Hands of the Supreme, Achilles Esmeralda had called this group, and, casting his eyes over this assembly, Dragon counted 100 people exactly, all of similar ages to Skipper. The pursuit of glory came easily to the young, he supposed. The boy with the curly hair glanced towards the youngest skipper. "You all right, Z?" he said, voice scratchy. "You're quieter than usual. Haven't talked since that last stop." The young skipper looked back, and the smirk on his face was exactly the same as the one Dragon had just seen. "Excited," he whispered. "Dahlia's boys are meant to be the strongest outlaws in this sector, yeah? That's what you said, Klaus." Is it Klaus or Klaus?
Klaus.
Klaus? Klaus, Hamastiel murmured, the shadow of recognition in his tone. The young skipper continued, smirk spreading into a predatory grin.
Preparatory.
"It's a chance..."
Preparatory.
Preparatory?
You said predatory.
No, I said... Oh, you're right. Wait, was it predatory? Did you change it?
I didn't change it, no. You just read it wrong.
Dyslexia moment? Finding out, 23 years of age, I can't read.
Oh my gaslight.
Into a preparatory grin. To be fair, what the fuck is a preparatory grin?
A grin of preparation.
Okay. It's a chance to show them what we're made of. To have them notice us. How could I not be excited? Klaus snorted, looking off into the distance. To make him notice you, I think you'd have to punch a hole through a mountain. Dragon followed his gaze and saw him. He didn't know the legends of the supremacy. He didn't know the Supreme Guard. He didn't know the faces of the contenders. But he knew this man. It was impossible not to. He stood tall atop the hill, red cape billowing in the wind behind him, golden aether crackling around his arms. He was young here, and long chestnut hair spread out behind him, his beard braided into magnificence. His body was splendid with muscle, carved like marble, and as he watched over the surrounding landscape, it was like a work of art all by itself. He wore nothing save that cape and a flimsy kilt, but he showed no signs of discomfort. Dragon doubted there was anything that could cause him discomfort. This was the Supreme. This was the strongest. Does he have gray skin at this age as well, or is that just because he's old?
That's just, well, he's not even because he's old, because he's not moved so long that he was covered in dust.
Oh. Dragon gulped as he looked at that titan of the world, for a moment experiencing the absurd fear that this memory would spot him and evict him from reality. Hamastiel simply stared silently, feline eyes narrowed in petty analysis. Skipper just glared, but not at the Supreme. His ire was instead directed towards his younger self, who was staring at the Titan with twinkling eyes. Dragon heard the boy whisper something under his breath. "This is the best day of my life!" Time was merciless. The scene shifted, and the three of them were standing in blood. The caves they found themselves in were already ravaged with battle, littered with bodies, and as Dragon looked around, he spotted the first cracks of a dream. Skipper panted as he pushed the corpse of an Umbran woman off himself, the bayonet of his musket sliding free. His face was covered in her blood, and his eyes were wide with frenzy. For a moment he struggled to pick himself up, only managing it when Klaus hurried over and hauled him to his feet. "You okay?" the other boy said seriously. The young skipper nodded absently. "She just came at me. I wanted to just knock her out or something, but..." Klaus clapped a heavy hand onto his shoulder. "It's how things work out. We're here to do serious work. You did what you had to." His eyes narrowed. "Don't say stuff like that too loud, okay?" Again, a vacant nod, and a glance towards the Supreme. He was sitting on a throne in the middle of the cavernous space, the broken body of a stretched-out scurrant woman in his hands. He let the noodle-like form slip through his grip, and in a fit of frustration stomped down on the intact head. There was a sound like the popping of a balloon. From this distance, Dragon couldn't see if he was saying anything, but the expression on the Supreme's face was such that he didn't dare approach even a memory. Time was merciless. Another day, another battle, the burning wreckage of an airship caught in a massive web of sparkling red chains between two mountains. Dead crew members slid off the deck and tumbled into the abyss below as members of the Supreme Guard boarded the vessel, magnetic boots granting them purchase. The young skipper walked vertically up, musket slung over his back, eliminating whatever hostiles still remained with what could only be Heartbeat's shotgun. The bangs produced by the ability bounced off the vastness of the scenery, echoing back and forth. One enemy, clad in full armor, wormed his way out onto the deck behind Skipper, hanging onto an alcove with one hand to prevent himself from falling. He pointed his gun at the unaware youth, finger curling around the trigger, but that was as far as he got. A tendril of purple smoke crept into the crevices of his helmet, and immediately he started screaming, clawing at it with such panic that he forgot to keep hold. Immediately he fell, flipping end over end as his muffled screaming faded into nothingness. The young man named Klaus had been covering Skipper's back, and the two exchanged nods of acknowledgement as the purple smoke returned to Klaus's hand. Far above, the Supreme stood atop empty air, the ends of those red chains clutched in his hands as they secured the ship. There was an empty look to his gaze. Time was merciless. The young skipper stood to attention, Klaus next to him, atop the egg-shaped Goliath that was the great hall of the body. The cityscape of Azum-Ha spread out before them. I assume them.
Yes.
Celebratory banners and holograms dyeing the planet red, and their fellow Supreme Guard filled the rest of the space around them like plants filled a garden. Dragon recognized this kind of scenery. Every year, the people of Azum-Ha would put on this event to celebrate the anniversary of the Supreme's ascension. From what he knew, though, it had been quite a while since the Supreme had actually attended it. In this memory, the Supreme slouched in a grand throne as, one by one, officials made their way through the gap between the two crowds of Supreme Guard to pay their respects. The three wise men, the most prominent ministers of the body, were first, followed by countless other ministers and governors, numerous special officers and warriors. Even one or two foreign dignitaries were in attendance, not quite able to disguise the dread in their face from this display of nationalistic zeal. The Supreme accepted all worship and fear with equal disdain, his eyes half-lidded as if he was about to fall asleep. He did not speak even once during the proceedings. If Dragon had to describe the look on the mighty man's face, the word he'd use without a doubt would be despair. Time was merciless. Walking islands died in their blood. The massive crustaceans punched open, and their insides ripped free. Dragon watched as the young skipper watched the Supreme, arms bathed in green ichor. I don't know if I used watched twice there.
No, it's intentional.
Alright. A massive grey wolf manifested through the Supreme's aether, sat loyally next to him, but the Titan himself just stared down at his easy kill. He seemed dissatisfied. Wait, didn't he have red chains before?
Yeah.
Is this aether red?
It's golden.
That's right, that was earlier. Time was merciless. Pirates were herded one by the Supreme Guard into the wreckage of the arena they'd been using on the locals, and one by one they were dispatched by the Supreme himself. Not one lasted more than a second, and not one left enough to be called a corpse. The serpents of water and fire that burst forth from the Supreme's elbows were more than enough to rend them beyond existence. The golden aether that flooded the arena with each attack was akin to a supernova. The young skipper watched. The stars... The stars long gone from... Maybe chill on the editing a bit. The stars long gone from his eyes, and slowly glanced away. Time was merciless. The automatic, once the size of a fortress all by itself, lay in a broken heap of torn limbs and mechanisms. The Supreme himself sat cross-legged atop it. Once, twice, the Supreme pounded the material below with a frustrated fist, each blow sufficient enough to shake the earth. The young skipper watched. His dull eyes matched the Supreme perfectly. Time was merciless. The man who was like the sun killed. Disappointing, the Supreme muttered. He held the broken body of his adversary aloft. In the end, the legendary warrior had barely survived a minute against him. Impressive, but not nearly sufficient. Time was merciless. The man who was like God killed. Disappointing, the Supreme muttered. A cityscape burned, a foolish planet that had dared attempt to leave the supremacy. The Knights of Plenty that had declared their rebellion lay dead on the floor of the Senate chamber, their armor melted into their forms. What was left of their faces betrayed their dying agony. When the young skipper glanced to his friend Klaus, he saw a glare that matched his own. Time was merciless. The man who was like death killed and killed and killed again, But no matter how much he killed, the blood that washed his hands remained unworthy. They had called themselves witches, the band of assassins that had stashed themselves away in the caves and tunnels of Biolight, the ever-dark world lit by the bioluminescence of its inhabitants. Their aether abilities had taken on a magical aesthetic, to be sure, but in the end, the Biolit witches had been as human as anyone else. The way they had shattered proved that better than anything. The Supreme sat atop a butchered tree, his face in his hands, clearly contemplating the ease of his victory. His Supreme Guard milled about, already preparing the ships to leave the planet. The Supreme had only come here to fight the Biolit witches, and now that they had been dealt with, this place held no further attraction. There had been rumors of a new crime syndicate forming in the Dreamstar system. Like many of the enemies that remained for the Supreme now, they were minuscule, but for someone like him, there was no option but to pursue. He was the kind of creature that died if he stopped moving. The young skipper sat on a bench, taking a swig from his bottle of water. His eyes locked on the Supreme himself. This latest campaign had been exhausting, the Supreme allowing no time for rest as he moved from target to target, with all the desperation of a man knowing he'd long ago run out of worthy opponents. Sleep had long since become a luxury. The young skipper kept himself on his feet with stimulant packs, and even they had begun to lose their edge. They'd made camp in a nearby village as they'd searched the tunnels for surviving witches, and as Skipper watched, he saw the village elder make their way over to the Supreme's repose. The old woman hobbled using a walking stick, her face covered with the bioluminescent face paint endemic to the region. Although they were part of the Supremacy, Biolight was only one step above a Lilith world in terms of infrastructure. No doubt this visit from the Supreme was the most excitement they'd ever seen. Skipper didn't know why, but he found himself following the woman with his eyes. She reached the Supreme, cleared her throat, and died. The moment she'd opened her mouth to speak, the Supreme had reflexively raised an arm, blurred by vibration, and the blast of motion that had erupted from the limb reduced the woman to a fine red mist. Not even the plants where she'd been standing survived. The landscape converted to cruel, gray stone. He'd killed her with all the effort it took to crush an insect. Heads turned to look at the sudden noise, and Skipper sprang to his feet. But the Supreme just looked up at the sight of the murder, sighed in irritation, and shook his head. "Don't bother me," he muttered to empty space. "How much longer until—" Bang! For a second, Skipper could have sworn a gunshot had gone off, and as the Supreme suddenly stumbled forward, he could have sworn the giant had been hit. But that was simply ridiculous. There was no way a measly gunshot could disturb the Supreme's tranquility. The very notion was absurd. It was only when the Supreme turned to look right at him, eyes wide, that Skipper understood this was reality. The attack had glanced off the Supreme's head, shredding one of his ears and reducing it to limp scraps of skin. It hung, bleeding, from the side of his skull. Skipper knew full well that the Supreme had countless abilities that would heal that injury in an instant, yet he made no move to do so. He just stared at Skipper. Slowly, Skipper looked down, and saw his own finger, still crackling with emerald aether, pointing right at the Supreme. Heartbeat shotgun? He hadn't. Surely he hadn't. Had he just tried to kill the Supreme? Had he lost his mind? The Supreme's mouth widened into an exuberant grin. He seemed the happiest that Skipper had ever seen him. Someone was shouting. Across the clearing, supplies held in his hands. Klaus was staring at him in horror. Every plasma musket in sight was raised to point directly at Skipper, directly at the traitor. Skipper opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, he was struck by a dozen attacks at once. The wrath of the Supreme Guard he had just reflexively betrayed. He was dead before he struck the floor. A black void fell, all-encompassing, all-protecting, with only the slightest fuzz of static to betray its existence. Dragon took in a deep breath and was shocked to realize just how alien it felt. When was the last time he'd taken in air? It was like he'd just forgotten to do it while he was watching. Had he been watching? Or was he the thing being watched? He'd known Skipper's thoughts at those times, seen what was going through his head, so... "I've ejected you for just a moment," a red butterfly said in Hamashjiel's voice as it landed on his shoulder, "because you seem to be having difficulty distinguishing yourself." "Distinguishing myself?" Dragon mumbled. His tongue felt fat in his mouth. "It's a common issue with cogitants entering the Outer Garden for the first time," Hamashjiel explained patiently. "The fidelity of the scenario is such that you lose yourself in your analysis of the scene, and thus confuse yourself with the subject. It shouldn't happen again, but I thought it best I warn you. Be careful to keep a grip on yourself. Dragon furrowed his brow. Outer garden? Hamastiel suddenly froze between one flap of his wings,
Yeah.
and the next, and the buzzing static around them suddenly seemed quite hostile. Dragon opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, the crimson of Hamastiel's wings flared, and then there's a bunch of noises. It's a common issue with cogitants entering the garden for the first time, Hamastiel explained patiently. The fidelity of the scenario is such that you lose yourself in your analysis of the scene, and thus confuse yourself with the subject. It shouldn't happen again, but I thought it best I warn you. Be careful to keep a grip on yourself. Dragon nodded. All right, I guess. Can you put me back in? I haven't missed anything, right? Hamastiel shook his head as much as a butterfly was able, which is to say he rotated unnaturally on the spot like a 3D model of some kind.
Minecraft-looking ass.
No. No, he assured him. Thoughts are accelerated here. Barely a second has passed in that iteration. I shall return you now. The abyss that Dragon was returned to was as empty as the last void, but much more tranquil. The emptiness of the garden had seemed like something outside of reality, whereas the place where the young skipper now slept felt more like the bottom of the ocean itself, save for the lack of pressure. Only the upper part of the young skipper's body remained, floating in the dark liquid. His hanging entrails fluttered in the current like blades of grass. Metal cords kept him in place, and a rebreather was placed over his mouth, through which only the slightest rasp could be heard. I'm getting like Dragon Ball and the Med Pod vibes.
I've never seen it.
I'll show you. I thought you died, Dragon murmured, looking at the human wreckage. I know it's stupid to think that, but I did die, the present skipper said bluntly, unseen in the darkness. Then what? Dragon scoffed. They brought you back to life? The vaguest silhouette crossed its arms. It is what it is. Dragon waved a hand in front of himself, seeing specks of orange in the liquid they were floating in. He leaned in closer, peering at one of them, recognizing it. Panacea? He murmured. Along with whatever else they could throw at me, Skipper muttered darkly. Stimulants, growth gels, panacea. Anything they could do to bring their Supreme's new favorite toy back so they could reap the benefits. All around them, muffled by glass and plastic, Dragon could hear practiced voices speaking to each other. You were conscious? He asked, aghast. Skipper shifted. I heard, but I didn't understand. Lost cause. Wounds closed. The lights are on, but nobody's home. Legs grew. We continue as long as the funding does. Do you want to tell the wise men that we've wasted their time? Breathing stabilized. I don't care about Strauss's freak of nature. Vicious or not, a substitute is a substitute. Fingers twitched. Seal the room. Don't let them get through. What do you mean it isn't working? Security, get here! Eyes opened, and the glass shattered. The void collapsed into cruel light, washing over the young skipper. A low, weak moan trickled from his throat as he lifted a lethargic hand up to shield his eyes. Despite everything, however, he could not avoid seeing the person beyond, the one who had broken into this waking sleep. The woman, called the widow, inspected the sight before her, cocked her head slightly, and raised an eyebrow. There was the slightest smirk on her lips. And time was merciless. So how old was Skipper when he got thrown in the vat?
Like, 18, 19?
So is this implying that he was cloned and, like, had his memories implanted, or was he, like, literally repaired from the ground
Literally,
up, like,
Commander Shepard sort of situation.
I'm not familiar with Commander Shepard.
Brought back to life, then.
Damn. They revived his ass. So that's why he doesn't like Panacea, I'm guessing, because of all the experiments. Oh. And now he's got a prosthetic.
Yeah.
Got a little metal arm. Damn, man. So, what I'm understanding, and this is the most fucked up part about him wanting to kill the Supreme, is the whole reason he was in the vat and, like, had to go through all that is because he was, like, the first guy that, like, hurt the Supreme in a while, so he was like, oh boy, I want to fight him again. Why did you guys all kill him?
Exactly.
So they were...
Well, not so, like,
so
he didn't necessarily order it personally. It's like, the other guy's like, if we bring him back, the Supreme will fucking love us.
Yeah. So, the worst part is Skipper's plan kind of plays into what the Supreme wants anyways. Right. That's so sad. That's so sad! No. Alright, well, I think Corgan wanted me to ask you a lore question, but I forgot it.
Wow.
But You have a lore bit for today, though, right?
Absolutely. The Biolit Witches. Some of them survived the initial attack and went on to fight Wu Ming on the planet Darkroos.
How'd that go?
It went pretty well. They managed to destroy his heart, but he made a new one out of string until he could have it repaired.
So they're still alive?
Oh no, they all got fucking killed after they destroyed the heart. It was like the moment where like, we've won, we've killed him, and then strings came out and cut off all their heads.
Damn, talk about string theory.
You can tell that I had that planned. I didn't make that up on the spot.
I do believe you.
You're a fool then.
And then, you already said this in the chat, but just for the people who don't follow, the largest thing ever recorded was a forest, correct?
Oh yes, I can't comment further, but it was a forest.
Like, including, like, the ground underneath, not just the trees?
It's the vegetation of a forest, is what I'll say. Vegetation and limited insect life of a forest.
But not, like, the ground and the land?
No.
Okay. So that was what my curiosity was like.
I'll also say, I'll say a little bit more, we have seen that said forest in the story.
When was there a forest? I'm trying to remember. In part 5.
I'm not going to tell you.
Right?
You have to remember.
In Arc 5 there was a forest. That was like the fucked up swamp, right?
Who can say?
But my point was, so let's say there was like the uber cogitant, right, who has no limits to their brain. What determines the limit of the size of something that can be recorded? The person who can comprehend it, or does Aether have a size limit?
Well, it depends really on the personal sort of mental capacity of the person doing it. The willingness.
So it's
of
limited by the person, not by the power. Okay.
Yeah.
So it has to do with the subject and the recorder. There's no technical limit to Aether's.
Yeah. So if you're like your best, you're like someone who's like, sure, you can record me, buddy. It'll be a lot easier, basically.
Yeah. Well, I guess the plants. How do they fight back? I guess I should ask: is this JoJo Rule of Souls, where like colonies of plankton and like streets have souls, or like is this a humans only?
I'm not going to comment
type thing. Tell me, is Aether life force the power of all living things, souls, and consciousness?
No, it's power.
It's
just consciousness.
Very curious. All right, well, thank you for the chapter, and to all of you, perhaps we'll get even more juicy lore next time. Because I'm curious why Skipper would want to kill the Supreme if he knew that's what the Supreme wanted. My guess he would have gotten as far away as fucking possible, just out of spite. But I don't know. I guess. All right. Anyway, sorry. I don't know why I interrupted the goodbye with that.
No worries.
Bye.
Bye.